I grew up in a small, isolated town called Salome, Arizona, a quiet speck of desert about 2 hours west of Phoenix, out past Wickenburg. It's the kind of place most people only drive through on their way somewhere else. My family has owned land there for generations. We even have our own private cemetery out on the property, a place where the wind carries whispers and shadows seem to last longer than they should. My grandfather built the house we lived in with his own hands, a sturdy little place that stood stubbornly against the heat and storms of the desert. From my earliest memories, that house was never truly ours alone. We lived side by side with something unseen. Objects would move without warning. Things would fall or be thrown across the room when nobody was near them. Sometimes, deep in the stillness of night, we'd hear sounds we couldn't explain. Doors creaking open on their own, footsteps in empty hallways, murmurs in rooms that should have been silent. And then there were the lights. Out in the open desert with nothing but miles of sand and brush, strange orbs of light would drift across the horizon, glowing like lanterns with no carriers, no source, no explanation. Eventually, the house fell into disrepair and had to be torn down. The wood rotted, the roof sagged, and the walls became brittle with age. But the land itself remained untouched, and if anything, it feels even heavier now than it did when I was a child. There's a presence there, something that has always been there, and it doesn't seem interested in leaving. It feels restless, like it's trying to speak, trying to be heard, and sometimes it's almost as though it wants to be felt rather than feared. I've always been sensitive to places like this. I wouldn't call myself psychic, but I've always had a kind of empathy for people and spaces, an intuition that brushes up against the unseen. When I returned to that land years later, it was overwhelming. The feeling wasn't just a presence, it was suffocating, as though the ground itself was breathing in the life of whoever stepped on it. It sounds strange even to me, but that's exactly how it felt. Alive, watchful, hungry. One of my clearest memories from that time happened when I was about 5 years old. I had a terrible flu, so sick that even moving felt impossible. My mother was outside in the yard hanging laundry, and I was lying in the front bedroom, the one farthest from where she was. The house only had 2 bedrooms, and unlike modern homes, there were no built-in closets. My grandparents were from Ireland, and they had brought with them a preference for heavy, freestanding wardrobes that stood a foot away from the wall, leaving dark gaps behind them. That day I was weak with fever, my skin burning. My mother had left the wardrobe door slightly ajar as she rushed outside. I remember the air being still and heavy. The door to the yard closed softly behind her, and in that instant something shifted. Out from the open wardrobe, as though stepping out from behind a curtain, came the head and torso of a woman I had never seen in person, but instantly recognized. It was my great-grandmother, or at least something that looked like her. The only image I had ever known of her was a faded photograph that hung in our living room, her face frozen in time, unsmiling but kind. She moved toward my bed quietly, and though her form was hazy, I could feel the weight of her presence as real as anyone living. The mattress dipped as she sat down beside me. Her hand reached out, and when her fingers touched my forehead, the heat of my fever met the coolness of her skin. It wasn't cold like ice, it was cool like spring water, soothing and deliberate. She leaned closer, and in a voice softer than a whisper, said, "Everything is going to be all right." For a moment, all my fear faded. My eyes grew heavy and I closed them, feeling her still beside me. Then, almost seamlessly, I heard my mother enter the room and sit at my side, as though nothing had happened. I drifted off to sleep, exhausted but calm. When I woke, the fever that had been scorching me all day was gone. I felt lighter, steadier, as though whatever had come to me had taken the sickness with it. That was only one experience among many, but it has stayed with me all these years. The land where I grew up still carries that weight, that mystery. Some of what happened there felt protective, almost loving. Other times it felt darker, like something ancient watching from beneath the soil, waiting for someone to notice it. Even now, thinking about it, I can't decide which is more unsettling. The things we saw, or the things we only felt, but could never quite name.